I replied, "Then you must know I care." I didn't mean for her to notice, but she did. Her voice came from across the narrow hallway as I fumbled with my keys, and the air between us seemed to thicken. "I saw you watching." She said it evenly, not accusing, not playful, just aware. And what could I do except tell the truth, half-formed and clumsy on my tongue? "Then you must know I care." The words hung there, sharper than I'd intended, and I wanted to pull them back the second they left me. I should explain. Our building isn't anything special. 2 floors, paint peeling from the railings, the kind of place where the walls are thin enough to know when your neighbor's blender breaks. I moved in 3 months ago, mostly because it was cheap and close to the repair shop where I work. She's been here longer. Long enough that the delivery guys call her by name. Long enough that she knows which nights the streetlight outside will flicker and die. I noticed her before I ever spoke to her. At first, it was small things. The sound of her door unlocking 2 seconds before mine. The faint clink of a wine glass when the building was quiet. The way her heels clicked a steady rhythm down the stairs. She carried herself like she had lived enough years not to rush anymore. Mid-40s, I'd guess. Sharp posture, careful clothes, but not stiff. Confident. The kind of woman who doesn't need to fill silence, who can stand still in it until the other person breaks. I kept telling myself I wasn't watching. Not really. Just noticing. Except the noticing became habit. And habit became something I couldn't name. That night, it was the bookstore that betrayed me. I'd gone in after work, grease still faint on my fingers, just to kill time before heading home. She was there, leaning on the counter as she waited for the clerk to bag her books. A stack of hardcovers, all spines dark blue and gray, titles I didn't recognize. She looked different under the warm light, softer, almost. I should have turned away. Instead, I lingered near the shelves, pretending to scan the blur of titles while my eyes kept flicking back to her. That's when she glanced up. Direct. Precise. Like she'd been waiting for me to look. I froze, some half-smile caught on my face, too late to disguise it as coincidence. She didn't smile back, but something shifted at the corner of her mouth. A knowing twitch, a spark that reached her eyes for a second before she looked down again. I bought a book I didn't need, walked out 10 steps behind her, and somehow ended up on the same bus home. So when she said it, later that night in the hallway, "I saw you watching," I felt like she'd cracked open a door I'd only dared to press my ear against. The silence that followed was worse than any scolding could have been. She stood there with her grocery bag tucked against her hip, keys dangling loosely in her hand, waiting to see if I'd fill the air with something better than what I'd blurted out. But I didn't. I just swallowed, turned the key in my lock, and let the heavy click of the door say the rest. It's been 2 days. I still hear it in my head. Her tone, my reply, the way her eyes didn't flinch, like she hadn't decided yet whether my words were reckless or honest. And I can't stop replaying the moment, wondering which it will be. She knocked on my door the next evening, though she didn't linger long enough to call it a visit. Her voice carried through the half-open crack. "Sorry to bother you. My sink's leaking. Do you have a wrench?" It shouldn't have mattered. A neighborly request, nothing more. But something about the way she didn't quite meet my eyes made it feel heavier than it should have been. "I can take a look," I offered. She hesitated, lips parting like she meant to refuse. Then she gave the smallest nod and stepped aside. Her apartment was quieter than mine. Dim, too. A single lamp in the corner threw more shadow than light, and the faint smell of coffee lingered even though her cup on the counter was stone cold. I crouched under the sink while she leaned against the counter, arms crossed. I could feel her watching, though her silence wasn't like mine. It wasn't uncertain. It was measured, controlled, the kind that makes you fill it with whatever scraps of conversation you can find. "You read a lot," I said, nodding toward the neat stacks of books by the window. She gave a quick laugh, too sharp, as if surprised by herself. "Or I buy a lot. Reading's slower these days." The laugh faded, leaving something unguarded in its place. Her shoulders slumped just slightly, enough to show the weight she normally hid. That tiny slip, it caught me off guard. I wanted to ask why, but I stayed crouched, tightening bolts I'd already tightened, just to keep from breaking the moment with questions she wasn't ready to answer. When I finally stood, I brushed my hand on my jeans. She reached for a towel at the same time, and our fingers almost touched. Not quite. She drew back first, folding the towel neatly even though it hadn't been used. I appreciate it, she said, tone brisk again, armor back in place. But I noticed her hands, long, graceful fingers, restless at her sides when she wasn't holding something. I noticed the way her laugh still lingered faintly in the room, even after her voice had hardened. I noticed how tired she looked, the kind of tired that seeps into the corners of your eyes and doesn't leave, no matter how much you sleep. And I wondered how long she'd been holding herself that tightly, how many times she'd practiced keeping distance when someone stepped close. As I reached the door, she said my name. Quiet, almost like she wasn't sure she had permission to use it. I turned. Her mouth opened, then closed again. Whatever words she'd meant to give me, she swallowed them instead. She just gave the smallest shake of her head, as though dismissing something fragile before it could form. "Good night," she murmured. I nodded, stepped into the hallway, and shut the door behind me. But the silence that followed felt different now, like it wasn't just mine anymore. The storm came sudden, rattling against the old windows like impatient knuckles. Power flickered twice. Then the hallway outside went dark, leaving the building humming with uneasy silence. She was standing by her door when I stepped out, a half-empty candle flickering on the floor beside her. Her hair was loose for once, unpinned, and the shadows made her look younger in one moment, older in the next. "Lights are gone across the block," I said, as if she didn't already know. She nodded. I was about to open a bottle of wine, before I realized I'd be drinking it alone in the dark. The pause that followed wasn't long, but it stretched, waiting. I lifted my hand before I could stop myself. "Then don't be alone." Her apartment smelled faintly of rain. One candle on the table, a bottle breathing open beside it, and two glasses she set down with careful precision. We sat opposite each other, too close, given the dimness, the way the room narrowed around us. The storm outside made the windows shiver, and each time, her eyes flicked toward them like she was measuring how much she could bear. "You're young," she said suddenly, not as judgment but fact. I exhaled a short laugh. I don't usually announce it, but yeah. Her lips twitched, not quite a smile. She sipped her glass, then leaned back. "You should be out with people your age." "Not." She stopped, shook her head, and waved her hand like brushing away smoke. "Not here. Not with me." The words she didn't say pressed harder than the ones she did. The silence grew softer, though not sharp. We spoke in fragments, about the storm, about the bookstore, about nothing that mattered. But in those small exchanges, I learned things. That she hated the sound of dripping faucets. That she hadn't been back to her hometown in years. That she liked her coffee black, but kept sugar around for guests I don't invite. And I told her things I didn't usually admit aloud. How I sometimes stay late at the shop just to avoid the emptiness of my apartment. How watching her carry her groceries one-handed made me wonder why no one ever helped. Her gaze lingered when I said that last part. Long enough that I thought, just maybe, she'd let something slip through the armor again. Then her phone buzzed. She reached for it too quickly, the glass nearly tipping. A name flashed across the screen. I only caught the first letter, but it was enough to see the hesitation in her face. Enough to know it wasn't a stranger. Her fingers hovered, then she let the phone ring out. She placed it face down on the table, but her posture had changed, tighter, distant again. I wanted to ask. I didn't. Instead, I noticed how her hand brushed the stem of her glass twice before she finally drank, as if she needed the motion to steady herself. When the storm eased, she stood, smoothing her blouse, already creating space again. "Thank you for keeping me company." I rose, too, close enough now that the candlelight blurred the space between us. For a heartbeat, I thought of leaning in, of closing the impossible distance. But she stepped back first. "Good night," she whispered, eyes flicking to the door. And I left, the taste of unspoken words burning more than the wine. The night was too quiet, even for our building. No flicker of neighbors' televisions through thin walls. No footsteps echoing on the stairs. Just the low hum of pipes and the throb of my own pulse in my ears. She'd asked if I could help carry a box down from her closet, something she couldn't balance on the chair. A simple favor. That's all it should have been. But the moment I set the box on her table, we both lingered, neither moving toward the door. The silence grew heavy. She stood across from me, arms folded, though not defensive, more like she didn't know what else to do with them. Her gaze dropped, then returned to mine, steady but searching. Finally, she spoke. Low. Even. What are we doing? The words didn't sound like a challenge. They sounded like exhaustion, like she'd been holding them in until they burned too much to swallow. I tried to answer, but nothing came. My throat felt too tight. She stepped closer, not quite invading, but enough that I caught the faint scent of rain still clinging to her hair. You stand there like you want to say something, and then you don't. I swallowed. Because I don't know if I should. Her laugh was soft, bitter. And you think I do? That stung, not because she was wrong, but because she was right. The air thickened between us. I shifted my weight, wanting to reach for the box again, to have an excuse to move, but my hands stayed at my sides. I'm not trying to make this complicated. I managed. Her eyes narrowed, but not unkindly. More like she was examining me. It already is. You think I don't notice? The way you look. The way you hesitate at my door. You think I don't hear the silence when you're near. I blinked. My chest felt raw, scraped open. So you do notice. She didn't answer. Instead, she let the silence stretch again. But it wasn't empty this time. It was charged, brittle, like glass about to crack. Her hand lifted halfway, then faltered. She pressed it against her own arm instead, gripping her sleeve as though to steady herself. This can't keep happening, she whispered. Her voice shook, just enough that I knew she wasn't as certain as she wanted to sound. I wanted to tell her I agreed, that I'd stop, that I'd pull away, but I couldn't. So I stood there, caught in the wreckage of her honesty, watching the way her eyes glistened under the dim light. Don't make me ask you to leave, she said finally. Not angry, not cold, just vulnerable. The kind of line that bruises because it isn't rejection, it's a plea. And I left, carrying the weight of her voice like something I'd never be able to set down. We didn't speak for a week. Not a knock on the door, not a passing word in the hall. I told myself it was for the best, but the silence stretched too long, sharp as broken glass every time I walked past her door. Then one night, as I came back from work, I found an envelope taped to mine. My name written in quick, slanted handwriting. No return address. Just wait inside. I opened it in my apartment, hands clumsy, expecting maybe a note about rent or building repairs. But it wasn't that. Inside was a single photo. Black and white, edges curled. A man in his 20s, hair longer than mine, standing with an arm slung around her shoulders. She looked younger too, softer, eyes lit with something I'd never seen in them. Happiness, maybe, or ease. On the back, written faintly in ink, 1999. I didn't knock. Not right away. I sat on the edge of my bed with the photo resting in my hand, my chest too tight to breathe. Why give this to me? What was I supposed to do with it? When I finally crossed the hallway, the door opened before I could knock. She must have been listening. You got it, she said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes weren't. I held out the photo. Who? She took it, thumb brushing the edge like she couldn't help herself. Someone I thought I'd never see again. Her gaze flicked to me, sharp, measuring. You remind me of him. That's the problem. The words landed like a quiet earthquake. I wanted to ask 100 things. What happened? Where he was now? Why she would hand me this piece of her past after holding herself shut so tightly. But her posture warned me off. She set the photo down on the table, spine straight, shoulders squared, like she could only tell me if she didn't look at me. He died young, she said simply. Too young. And sometimes when you stand there, saying nothing, I hear him again. I hate it. And I don't want to. The silence after that was suffocating. I shifted, mouth opening, but no words came. My throat worked uselessly, as if any reply would collapse under the weight of what she'd given me. Finally, I asked the only thing I could. Then why show me? Her eyes softened, finally meeting mine. A flicker of something broke through, the exhaustion, the fear, maybe even relief. Because hiding it doesn't make it go away, she whispered. She looked down at her hands, unclenched them slowly, and the tremor in her fingers betrayed everything she was fighting to hold steady. That was all. No explanations. No stories. Just her standing there, stripped of her usual armor, letting me see the fracture she'd kept buried. And it was more intimate than any touch could have been. For 2 days after the photograph, we barely crossed paths. When we did, it was the usual, polite nods, thin smiles that said nothing. But something had shifted. I carried the weight of what she'd told me, and I think she carried the weight of letting me see it. On the third evening, I found her outside on the stairwell, sitting with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The night was warm enough, but maybe she needed the cover. A book sat closed in her lap. She didn't look up when I opened the door. "You can sit," she said. Her voice was tired, but not unkind. So I did. 2 steps below her, close enough to hear her breathing, far enough that the space still mattered. For a while we said nothing. The air smelled of rain on concrete, the distant hum of traffic filling the silence. My knee bounced, restless, but I kept it steady so it wouldn't break whatever fragile balance held us there. Finally, she spoke. "I shouldn't have shown you that." I shook my head. "I think you should have." Her laugh was short, bitter. "You're too young to know what to do with other people's ghosts." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "Maybe, but you still gave him to me anyway." That made her look at me. Not quick, not sharp, just steady, as though she was weighing whether she could stand the truth of my face so close to hers. She sighed, pulled the blanket tighter. "You make me feel things I told myself I was done with." It wasn't a confession, not really. More like an admission she hadn't meant to let slip. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "Then maybe we stop pretending we're not already here." The word "here" hung between us, too small to contain everything it meant. She didn't answer, but her hand shifted on the step, brushing against mine by accident, or maybe not. The skin of her fingers was warm, trembling just slightly, and I felt the tension leave me all at once. We didn't kiss. We didn't embrace. We just sat, our hands barely touching, while the night folded in around us. Her breathing slowed, and when she leaned the side of her head gently against my shoulder, I didn't move. I didn't dare. It wasn't passion. It wasn't romance. It was something heavier, quieter. An understanding that whatever this was, fragile, flawed, wrong to the world outside, was real enough for us. And maybe that was all either of us had been waiting for. We stayed like that until the streetlights buzzed back to life. She didn't lift her head, and I didn't let go of her hand. That was the truth of it. No declarations. No promises. Just the quiet collapse into something neither of us could name, but both of us finally allowed. It's strange how silence can change shape. Back then, it was sharp, heavy, filled with everything I was afraid to say. Now, when I think of her, silence feels softer. A room you don't have to fill. A weight that doesn't crush, but steadies. We never called it love. Maybe that's what made it real. There were no declarations, no promises. Just 2 people who found themselves in the same hallway, the same stairwell, the same quiet nights, and stopped pretending it didn't matter. She taught me things without meaning to. That strength doesn't always look like holding it together. Sometimes it looks like letting someone see when you can't. That age doesn't erase longing. It only makes it harder to admit. That ghosts don't disappear when you ignore them. They fade when you let someone else carry the memory with you. And me? I learned patience. I learned how to stay still long enough for someone to trust the space between us. I learned that care isn't always loud. It can be a hand resting against yours, or a head leaning on your shoulder, asking nothing more than to be allowed. We still live in the same building. Life hasn't suddenly turned cinematic. She still works late. I still fix engines. The walls are still too thin. But every now and then, I hear her laugh through the plaster, unguarded and unpracticed, and I know something has shifted. Not everything heals. Not everything becomes easy. But it doesn't have to. What we share is ours, and that's enough. When I look back, I think about the first time she caught me watching, the way my words tumbled out, reckless, clumsy, too much. And I realize now, I wasn't wrong. Because caring isn't always something you say. Sometimes it's something you show, one unspoken moment at a time, until the silence itself begins to feel like love. And maybe that's why I'm telling you this. Because we all have someone we notice. Someone we circle around, too afraid to step closer, too uncertain to pull away. So I'll ask you, have you ever been caught watching? And if you were, what would you say?